Hi.
Thank you. Good afternoon. For those watching remotely, this is a committee on environment. It's 2:15, and we are commencing our testimony with Ellen. Thank you.
Thank you. Ellen Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. We're taking up where you left off this morning, reviewing S 325 as passed by the Senate. And we left off on page 6 of as passed by this. This is the section, we're in section 4 regarding the housing amendments. To the amendment to the housing exemptions. So on page 6, subdivision 3. This is one of the interim housing exemptions. Currently, it says until January 1, 2027, no permit or permit amendment is required for housing built within a designated downtown district with zoning and subdivision bylaws served by sewer, water, or soils. So this is no cap on the number of housing that can be built in downtowns. The Senate is proposing to push that from January 1, 2027 to 2030. And like the other interim housing exemptions, adding the language that it is an exemption not only for the units of housing, but also for the subdivision for the housing and the mixed use development. On page 7. Subdivision 4 on page 7 is one of the other floor amendments from the Senate. So it is similar to some of the language we were just discussing, but it is new and the grammar maybe isn't perfect. Notwithstanding any other provision of law to the contrary, until January 1, 2030, no permit or permit amendment is required for the subdivision for or construction of 50 units or fewer of housing, with at least 20% of the units with mixed income housing or mixed use development, constructed or maintained on a tract or tract of land, located within areas of a designated village center and within 1/4 mile of its boundary, served by public sewer or water services, or soils that are adequate for wastewater disposal. So I'm just want to remind you that at the bottom of page 5 into page 6 also has an exemption for housing in village centers. But that 50 units of housing, as we were discussing this morning, requires that the village center have permanent zoning and subdivision bylaws, and this one does not. This is the floor amendment I wrote basically on the floor of the Senate, so I don't know that the grammar is perfect. It could really use a little clarity. They were asking for essentially priority housing projects in village centers. So currently under the definition of priority housing project, as we looked at this morning, it does not include village centers. It includes the 4 other designated areas. So, but the definition of priority housing project involves 20% of the units having mixed income or mixed use development. So using the definition of affordable, so 20% of the units affordable for at least 15 years. And then I'm not entirely sure about the very last part of the sentence. This is where I think the grammar is a little awkward. It's within the village center and within 1/4 mile of its boundaries served by public sewer and water or soils. And I'm not entirely sure if the served by sewer and water is modifying the 1/4 mile boundary or the village center. I'm not sure where the infrastructure is required to be. I think probably potentially within the area, but I think it could be worded more clearly.
Exactly. Now, Ellen, it says, so we have tracts of land. Is this constrains the land of any particular size, or is this any size parcel?
Yes.
Land. wondering if you can tell us how this section relates to the one that we spent some time on earlier, the top of page 6, which also is about village
Yes.
centers.
Yes. So the one that already exists in statute is for 50 units of housing or less. In a village center and within a quarter mile around it, if it has permanent zoning and subdivision bylaws and served by sewer and water. So the distinction with the new language is that, and sorry, before they had the floor amendment, the current law does have the requirement of 10 acres or less. So up to 50 units on 10 acres or less. Any type of housing. The new floor amendment is up to 50 units, no parcel size requirement. And they are at least 20% of the units are affordable, but there's no requirement for zoning. So there are more than 200 village centers. I don't have the exact number off the top of my head, but I think roughly half have zoning.
I know that 109 towns right now.
Okay.
Have either zoning or subdivision bylaw.
Okay, so yes, so that's the unit, it's somewhere in 50% range.
Yeah, so sounds like these two pieces are very closely connected, and even if we thought that these were all things we wanted to keep, we would probably want to revisit this and restructure it so it would make more sense in statute. Does that sound right?
I think the last caveat, like the last clause could be a little more clear, because I think probably it should just match-ish the language on the other page. Like the sewer and water, I think it's a little confusing the way it's phrased to me, but is it that only the village center has to have the infrastructure, or is it that the whole quarter mile radius around it also has to have the infrastructure?
Representative Pritchard, did you have a question?
Yeah, it was my understanding, you said this was a amendment on the floor. It was my understanding that it started in committee and had the support of the chair. And they just wanted to, they change, I guess there was some changes that they wanted to make, and that's when it came to the floor to be amended. Is that correct? I think Chair Watson supports this.
So I'm on page 7.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry, right here.
Whether or not Chair Watson supports it, these obviously got voted in, but neither the top of page 6 or the top of page 7 were in committee. They were both, I wrote page 7 like on the floor of the Senate. So the committee took up the amendments, and I do think they supported the amendments in the end, but they were not part of committee discussion before the day of the floor.
Okay.
And Representative Chapin.
I guess I personally don't want to spend time wordsmithing this because I can't see how we would support it. It's for areas that don't have zoning, and it would be such a departure. Like, we have other more important things to work on with Act 181 than considering making exemptions for housing projects outside of areas that have good municipal oversight. So personally, I hope we can just move on and let this piece go. And I will just say, this is the piece that LURB said yesterday, puts lower income property owners at risk for flood impacts, and that they do not recommend we adopt this. And
Yeah. I agree with Representative Chapin. This is also reminding me that some of what we heard in the last couple of weeks of testimony, and actually prior to that with municipal regulation of agriculture, so that there's little threads. I want to make sure we carry them through and insert them appropriately. But these are potential areas of pretty big conflict with agricultural prime soils. And what I hope that we do is, in addition to accommodating natural function in our more heavily populated downtowns and village centers, we've been asked, and I support, looking at how we support the production of food in those areas. And I think this would potentially conflict with that.
I just want to say thank you for saying that. And this also could make major forest fragmentation. Like, it It's both ag
that,
and
yeah.
forestry. Just, this would be a humongous departure.
Logan.
Thank you. Actually, could you both explain what you mean a little bit more? It's not quite sinking in for me yet. I am assuming I'll agree with you after you explain yourself a little bit.
Well, for me, well, starting where Representative Chapin started, which I also noted, like, we have 109 communities that don't have local development review because they don't have zoning or subdivision bylaws. And they're counting on Act 250 review to address larger developments that happen in their communities.
Including designated village centers.
Sure,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it would blindside our smallest communities who have depended on it for the last 50+ years. But then in addition to that, yeah, I mean, I guess you're right. So this is village center focused, but I guess I'm still going back to, we need to be sure that we are integrating food production even in our built environment and considering that sort of, I'm almost going to call it both livable communities or even in the most densely populated areas. So you want to?
Yeah, and I'll just add that prime ag soils exist right in and around village centers, and this is why you need good review to make sure development happens in as thoughtful a way to preserve those uses.
Right, and so I guess then I understand that my question is really like, so there are in fact designated village centers that don't have zoning and or bylaw.
Well, I think it's a good question. How many?
Yeah,
I mean, that's all of these. What's the problem we're trying to solve?
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, we could use good mapping, but we don't generally have access to it.
yeah.
We also took 2 weeks of testimony and nobody asked us.
Oh,
Nobody commented on this except for when I asked the LURB.
is it possible for us to find that out?
It is, I mean,
But I get.
maybe. We don't get a lot of access
And
to
the LURB
GIS
felt that
services.
this was an environmental justice nightmare.
Right, this is the one where they did say, yes,
This is the,
yeah,
they said that about.
yeah, that's fair. Well, that's a huge expansion too, we're doing, so.
All right, page 7, section 5. Section 5 is amending the tier 3 rulemaking provision, the session law provision that is in Act 181. The Senate was proposing to make to add an additional consideration for the tier 3. So it's in addition to the other review that the Land Use Review Board is doing to determine the tier 3 areas and what should be considered as part of them. At the top of page 8, they also added that the Land Use Review Board shall determine which and under what circumstances criteria under Act 250 should be part of the tier 3 area review.
So one thing I am gonna put out for discussion and perhaps a request for you to think about, Ellen, is if we just stop using the tiers and kind of rename 1A and 1B what they really are, which is like delegated areas.
Mhm.
And then we are the rest of Vermont, all of Vermont, in fact, because unless nobody so far is a delegated area. So with the exception of the temporary housing exemptions, the whole state is under some level of Act 250 review right now. And so I put that out a little bit yesterday. I'm seeing some nods. Before we ask Ellen the extent of that, like what the ramifications of that ask are, statutorily, how big is it of an ask? I'm just wanting to make sure that we agree that that's a direction we want to head. Representative Logan.
Yes, thank you. As a member of a community that would undoubtedly end up with most of our town, our city under delegation, I think it's a much better description of what's happening. and that the term has been like unnecessarily divisive.
Mhm.
Because I do think it's really important for Vermonters to understand that delegated means that we are paying tax money ourselves to provide the same or higher level of oversight of our community. And I'm paying state taxes to pay Act 250. So we're taking on a larger share of the responsibility for land use management in fiscal terms and freeing up our state's resources so that they're more available to rural communities so that they can get the oversight that they need without having to do all this taxation and bylaws and all that kind of stuff. So I feel very strongly that like figuring out some way to better communicate what we're actually doing is important. And I've received comments from folks saying, sounds to me like there's some, like you're considering removing delegation. And because it's getting confusing to talk about an exempt area makes it like we need to stop using that like exemption terminology because we're not exempt. Like Burlington is not going to be exempt. We're going to be doing all of that work and we're going to be paying for it ourselves. So that's how, what
And just to clarify, the housing provisions that we've just been looking over earlier, those are exemptions.
yes, those are
Until the
actually
delegated authority that's in place.
Representative Wade.
Just excited to draft this stuff, Ellen. So basically, if we get rid of tier 3 and we basically just go to delegated and essentially everything else, like, so you're just gonna have to go in here and with every reference to tier 1, it's gonna be changed. Tier 3 sections, two sections, you could probably just do section repeals, right?
So there aren't a ton of references, luckily. So for tier 3, there is no other individual statutory section, just the definition of tier 3.
Okay.
So that'll be pretty easy to clean up. And then just 6033 establishes the process for what is currently tier 1B, and 6034 is the process to apply for tier 1A. So I think primarily those are the only sections that will need to be cleaned up.
Okay.
And perhaps they are kind of full delegation and housing delegation. I don't know yet if we're ready for picking the term, but I just want to know about folks' opinion on the concept.
And tier 2?
Go away.
Tier-
Tier 2 really.
So the only mention of tier 2 is in relation to tier 3. So I think there aren't too many things to change on that.
Rename the study and expand
Yes.
it
Yes.
and or make it more specific. What's the question we're asking? So things I want folks to be thinking about.
So as we walk through this, we can skip some of the sections about 2 or 3.
Yeah, I guess that was sort of my next
Yeah.
question. I mean, because there are in here changes related to tier 3.
Right. Yes, unless if they're just dates, we can definitely skip them. If they are inspirational substantive things, I mean, then, I don't know. I don't think there's too many of those, but if there were, we could,
section 5.
Okay. section 5, yeah.
Yeah, so if section 5 was making a change to the tier 3 rulemaking process, and then also pushing back the date. But so if you're interested in getting rid of it, this whole section would be repealed.
Well, this is where the language of kind of what is a critical natural resource is.
Okay.
So that's the kind of thing I want to put in the buckets. We don't lose them.
Okay.
Yeah. Not to say that we would use them the same way, use them differently, but make sure we're keeping track of them.
Okay. And then section 6 is also related to this because section 6 amends 10 VSA 6025, the rulemaking authority for the Land Use Review Board, specifically giving them rulemaking authority to reduce the number of criteria that would be involved in review for both road jurisdiction projects and tier 3 projects.
Don't need that anymore. Representative Austin.
Just to clarify, outside of tier 1, in, tier 1A and tier 2A, what will be the process? Let's say for towns that don't have any, family support.
Act 250.
Same as
Would
it's
it-
always been. It won't change.
Just Act 250?
Mhm.
It would just, so even if you just want to build a single house on 2 acres, it would be Act 250?
No, that's not what would trigger Act 250. It's,
So who would kind of, who would be in charge of that?
well, that's an
house?
interesting question. I think that there are, there's subdivision laws that people have to follow that are state. And then there's wastewater and water, and that really is the limit on those houses,
So that's what I was wondering.
up to 6 units in those towns, I think, or 6 subdivisions.
So are you concerned about that at all in terms of, I don't like a lot of regulation,
That's
but
why we're gonna study the effects of this. I mean, that,
I'm sorry, I'm just kind of,
no, it's a good
you
question.
know. Uh-huh.
It's a fair question,
Yeah.
but it's what we've been doing for the last umpteen years.
Okay.
55 years.
And there's a study in 325 about a discretionary review of housing at the zoning level, and then there was also a few reports in Act 181 that are around this topic that I think we're going to talk
Yeah.
about more
Whoop.
later
You
too.
know,
So
you're probably asking for strike all and putting these pieces back in. And some out. But definitely the language around the tier 2 study, which we'll rename.
So on page 9, section 7 is amending the effective date section of Act 181, and it was pushing out dates related to the section 21 on line 9. That's tier 3, the effective date for tier 3, and then section 19, which is on line 11. That's the road jurisdiction triggers. So these will be changing moving forward. The date on line 7 for sections 12 and 13, those are the definitions and then the criterion section related to criterion 8C. And currently that effective date is December 31st of this year, being pushed to January 1, 2028.
That's the forest block connectors, right? Or-
Yes,
Yeah.
forest blocks and habitat connectors. Next is section 8. This is related to, this is the procedure and requirements for section 6034 tier 1A areas. So I think you were proposing to change that to delegated areas. The only change in this section currently is on the top of page 10, which is striking the reference to rare species. So this is about the type of bylaws or policies that need to be in towns seeking this. So it's striking reference to planned maintenance of significant natural communities, striking rare, and then threatened and endangered species.
Everybody seems fine with that.
I would like to know more, but I can't remember what, do you remember what the issue was?
Billy Coster, I believe, testified that ANR doesn't have policies specific to rare species. They only have authority regarding threatened species and endangered species.
Ian is in our room.
I believe that ANR just said they didn't necessarily have a specific policy around rare.
They used to have a database of RTE, rare, threatened, endangered.
And that tier 1A will just be replaced with designated.
Representative
Where-
Logan.
So do they have a policy about significant natural communities?
I'm not sure, but currently, that is the language in Act 250, Criterion 8.
Yes, I mean, they're mapped. I mean, these
Yeah.
are all mapped, so.
but there's nothing about rare. In the group.
I am surprised too.
Okay,
I was wondering, so currently criterion 8 in Act 250 has language regarding a permit shall address that a project will not have an undue adverse effect on the scenic or natural beauty of the area, aesthetics, historic site, or rare and irreplaceable natural areas. And I was,
Hearing 8 now?
yes.
yeah.
And so I guess I couldn't remember. I was wondering if rare is maybe in the wrong place in that sentence. Because, right, rare, maybe perhaps it's rare and irreplaceable natural areas.
Oh, it is confusing language actually, because it starts out by saying significant natural communities, rare, threatened and endangered species. So you're right. It doesn't actually, like, it's not referring to the right. Well, it could be a rare species, but it could also be a rare something else that we're talking about.
Right, I mean, rare, threatened, endangered species is a pretty common way of referring to that.
Yeah.
We need to find out more.
I'm putting that in the universe that rare and irreplaceable. Because I think you were trying when you drafted this section to match as many of the Act 250 criteria as you
Yeah.
could.
Sure.
All right, page 10, section 9. Section 9, municipal zoning is maybe not the best title for this either. This is about what have been tier 1A areas and are going to be delegated areas. It's adding clarifying language to be clear that the reason permit conditions would be transferred from an Act 250 permit to a municipal permit is so that the conditions would then be enforced as part of the municipal permit.
Mhm. Yeah.
And the other change in this section is is on page 12. It's striking the requirement that towns would enforce existing Act 250 permits that haven't had their conditions transferred to a municipal permit.
The first part of this amendment transfers them upon an amendment. Is that true? So
Yes.
since maybe enforced as part of a municipal permit, yeah.
So on page 12, this is this is a new report that is in S325, section 10, discretionary review of housing. So this is asking the Department of Housing and Community Development to consult with VLCT, Let's Build Homes, VNRC, and the planners on how to reduce negative impacts of discretionary review of residential development. So here meaning zoning discretionary review. Also asking them to look at establishing a model code to replace discretionary review, looking at some language that is proposed at the federal level in a right to build zone law, and then steps the state can take to maximize the value, incentives to offer municipalities to limit discretionary review, and then also asking them to report back on their 802 homes pilot program and how to improve the efficiency of appeals of municipal zoning permits for housing.
Members have questions on this?
I just remember in the testimony, it just seemed like there was a lot of inconsistency. In different boards and how they determined eligibility for a permit. And I have to say, I felt like there was some cronyism also that people were talking about, kind of who you knew or, and I just wonder how we make this more consistent as possible in terms of determinations. I mean, maybe that could be in the report or something, but I don't know. I think this section deals with that, but I'm not exactly sure.
This section,
Discretionary, the whole.
looking at the, I mean, I think some communities, I know Middlebury for a while at least had form-based code, which I think is what this is also referred to as. At least in our downtown, and then and I think Burlington does in some areas. And yeah,
Rochester does in one area.
so I mean, I guess I wonder, I mean, model bylaws are out there already. There's examples in Vermont of communities doing that. And the universe of appeals is certainly something known. I know it gets under people's skin, but it isn't really very many. Yeah, Representative Levine.
Thank you. I don't have any questions, but I do have a comment. I mean, this sounds like an interesting report. I want to read this personally, but I do think it would also be helpful to expand the scope of a report like this, to talk about, I think, some of the other concerns that we're hearing about our permitting processes at the state level. And I actually hear just as many, if not more, complaints about the experience of trying to navigate the permitting process at the state level as I do about development review at the municipal level. So that seems to me like another area of interest for a report on housing related regulatory transformation that we might want to consider.
Yeah, so I know that we've heard, and we've taken testimony, and more testimony was offered on the permit portal or whatever they're standing up at A&R. So we can hear more specifics about that. They are working on their part of that. And I also feel like we've gotten reports on this, or there might be one underway somewhere. Is there, Ellen?
Some of this overlaps with the appeal report that was issued at the beginning of
Yeah.
this year. So the 802 pilot program has already started, and so I'm not sure if they have a specific report due for that itself, because I didn't work on that language at all. So it's possible, but I do think there is overlap with the report you got recently, but this does address a couple other things.
So I guess before we add more on that, I mean, this has improved efficiency of appeals, which not sure we'll ever agree on. Representative Chapin.
It's just, it was my understanding, that this is in part really driven by this federal right to build concept. Sort of, in order to hear about that as it applies to Vermont and Vermont stakeholders. That's what we would need.
What do you mean that's what we would
We
need?
would need this,
To see if it was something relevant.
yes, or something else. It seemed like that was a key reason that this is in here.
Yeah, why isn't that referenced?
It is.
Oh,
It's in the next thing,
Page 12.
Vermont Model Code,
Line
and
17.
then potential value of the federal.
Oh, yeah, okay.
My guess is we'll hear about it either way, but getting all of those entities to weigh in on it might not happen.
Okay. Keep going.
Page 13. So section 11 starts with some amendments related to regional planning and regional planning commissions. So section 11 is amending 24 VSA 4348, which is the adoption and amendment process for regional plans. And so this is, I did want to flag, I'll walk through the changes here, but Subsections B, D, and H are also in H940 that you passed out of the House over to the Senate because there was a proposal in there about lining up the enhanced energy planning process to be fully integrated with this so that there aren't separate meetings on just one part of the regional plan, the energy plan, so that it can just be part of this. And so it might be a good idea. And if that bill were to pass soon and then you passed this and it conflicted, it would undo that bill potentially unless this language matched that. So it's just a couple of small things and it doesn't, the language doesn't specifically conflict, but it's amending some sections that you're amending here also.
And I think they took testimony on that this morning.
Think so, yeah.
Right, moving parts.
So here though, in this bill, it's separating the plan, the regional plan adoption process from a regional plan amendment process. And so in a few places, amendment has been struck so that it's moved to a later subsection in here. The first change is adding reference to that the land use review board shall also coordinate with the state agencies and the community investment board, because the community investment board's work is related to the designated areas that are also identified in the regional plan as the LURB is reviewing it. The bottom of page 13 into 14 is striking reference to holding 2 or more hearings on a regional plan amendment. So currently it's required if the plan is being readopted or amended. This is pulling it out here because there's setting up a process later in this section. And then again, on page 14 in subsection D, removing amendment here from these steps so that it's captured later in this section. Same in E and F. And then page 15 into 16 is subsection J has that already in this process, there's an ability for there to be minor amendments to a regional plan that don't have to go through the full process. And that's if it's considered a minor amendment if it affects less than 10 acres. And so
Is that 10 acres in here?
I think it is actually it's at the top of page 16. It's on the next page. And so currently, so for a minor amendment, the Regional Planning Commission submits a request for a minor amendment to the Land Use Review Board with a letter of support from the municipality, only made after an affirmative vote of the municipality affected and the Regional Planning Commission. They shall provide, the Land Use Review Board is supposed to provide guidance on what constitute a minor amendment, but at the top of page 16, it's any change to a future land use area consisting of fewer than 10 acres. And a minor amendment to a future land use area shall not require an amendment to the full regional plan and will just be included in the next round of readoption. And so then that's to point out that subsection N is trying to address non-minor future land use map amendments.
Minor. That's a problem word. I mean,
Same pages.
yeah. Representative Rowland?
I'm not ready to ask my question yet.
Okay.
Thank you.
Non-minor future. All right, so we did hear from the RPCs on this, but it strikes me that
So do we have a definition of minor amendments or minor not in here, or is this the definition J? Is this the definition of it?
I think that's the only definition of it. It does say that the Land Use Review Board has authority to issue guidance on it, but it does say it's any change fewer than 10 acres.
So non-minor would be presumably larger than 10 acres.
Yeah,
Rather than the term non-minor, could we just say not, not section J? So, no.
Well,
I actually don't mind non-minor because minor has a definition. I'm not sure that like 11 acres would be a major amendment, but it would be a non-minor amendment.
Representative Logan.
Okay, I think I'm finally ready. Could we, I think I agree with other folks that non-minors, the language is kind of awkward. Like yeah, kind of like a double negative a little bit. I'm wondering if we could amend the section on minor amendments to say anything that is not a minor amendment is a major amendment. And then just use major amendment everywhere else.
I think you could do that.
Like that section J is clear.
Mhm.
Anything that isn't that is. So it could be a major amendment.
Representative Chapin.
I guess. Only feedback we've gotten from this, from LURB and the RPCs is that they want this option. Personally, I don't love the word major because I think it has big connotation and non-minor is very specific to related to this thing called a minor amendment. So I don't know, personally, I think it works the way it is.
I guess, so we're talking about changes to the future land use map will be processed as part of a regional plan amendment. Which is how?
The process in the rest of this subdivision, the new language.
Below.
Yes.
Haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah.
New process.
Okay, let's get there and see what we think.
Yeah. So, so this applies to regional plan amendments, non-minor future land use map amendments, and tier 1B area status requests. And so we're gonna change the reference to tier 1B, but the plans are reviewed from time to time and may be amended. Non-minor future land use map amendments shall be processed as part of a regional plan amendment. Tier 1B area status requests may be made separate from regional plan approval or amendment process. To amend a regional plan, which may include a non-minor future land use map amendment, a regional planning commission shall hold one public hearing. Currently in statute, they're required to hold 2. At least 15 days in advance of the hearing, the regional planning commission shall provide notice of the public hearings to parties listed in subdivision D and the land use review board. The public hearing notice shall include a description of the changes to the plan, including non-minor amendments to future land use maps or any changes to tier 1B area status. I'm on page 17. After adoption of the regional plan amendment, regional planning commission shall submit a request to the land use review board for an affirmative determination of regional plan compliance for the regional plan amendment. Standalone requests for tier 1B area status shall be submitted to the land use review board after the public hearing required under that prior subdivision. The board shall hold a public hearing within 30 days after receiving the request for an affirmative determination of regional plan amendment compliance or approval of tier 1B area status. The board shall issue the determination within 30 days. And adoption of regional plan amendment, non-minor future land use map amendment, or tier 1B area status request or amendment shall not change the expiration date of the regional plan. So I do think there is an awkwardness here. I think perhaps right in the first subdivision N, you could just define that here we're defining amendments as either a regional plan, future land use map, a regional plan amendment, land use map amendment greater than 10 acres, or tier 1B area change, or housing delegated area change, instead of referring to all 3 throughout.
Yeah, and the tier 1B status requests, I mean, that's defined somewhere else but the town has to vote on them. Can you just remind us what that process is?
The regional, when the Regional Planning Commission is doing their general readoption process, they are to identify areas that are eligible as tier one B areas or delegated housing areas. And then the legislative body of the municipality has to vote to opt in to have that area proposed for approval at the Land Use Review Board review. There currently isn't a specific time identified of when they need to, there isn't a time that they have to do that by. It is, I think, phrased currently that a town could make that vote at any time currently, whether or not the RPC is going through an update or not.
Yeah, so for that process, I think I'm fine with it, but I'm wondering about what would the other instances of amendment be to a regional plan? And like, if a local authority has voted affirmatively and gone through their public process for 1B, or I'm going to say for the housing delegation authority, that seems very well vetted and people know. 15 days for, I don't know, the example of these non-minor amendments to the regional plan or the future land use. I don't know what, I'm curious what those would be.
So I think it could be if a town rezones an area that would then necessitate a change to the regional plan to reflect changes that have happened at the town level.
Zoning shouldn't be in the future land use. Wouldn't it be more what their town plan map will say? Which I guess could be changed by the zoning, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Maybe, possibly.
Okay, I think we need to ask the RPCs what this is gonna help with.
Okay. Bottom of page 17 into page 18, section 12 is amending 43, 48, which are the elements of a regional plan. And the first, these amendments are only related to the land use categories of the future land use map. And on page 18, the first change is just adding a specific reference, cross-reference to the smart growth principles, so that it's in the first intro paragraph instead of being addressed in multiple other land use categories. So the smart growth principles shall be part of all of the categories by moving it up higher in the statute. Then next on page 18 into 19, there's an amendment. There are two amendments to the downtown and village center area. I guess there are three actually, sorry. So on page 18, line 17, downtown and village centers are the traditional or historic central business and civic centers within planned growth areas, village centers, or may stand alone. So change from an and to an or regarding traditional and historic to or historic because some of them don't have historic centers. And then also adding a sentence that says the municipalities may have more than one center, including planned new or emerging centers that anchor planned growth areas or village areas. And then at the top of page 19, it is the intent that most towns in Vermont have at least one village center in which additional housing units are supported.
Whose intent is that?
I believe it was proposed by the planners, though I'm not sure.
That would be very odd. I don't think that's ours to say. If we're going ground up and doing local engagement and planning, it should come from the towns if they want a village center or. Yeah, it just feels really inappropriate.
Yeah.
Representative Sacco.
And what would be the effect of that kind of an intent language in statute?
Well, if we play out some of the other amendments. Yeah.
I think it is supposed to signal to the regional planning commissions that when they're looking at their regional plan map, that most towns will have at least one center. I don't know if there have been conversations outside of this legislation about RPCs not doing that. I suspect that might be where this is coming from.
I would take that out.
It's oriented more around the towns, right? We're trying to get a bottom up thing, like if the towns want to have one, okay, at least one center that would not go.
Well, we already can.
Yeah.
Right, so yeah, I don't know, we need to say that.
We don't need to say.
That's.
It's just a matter of the
on the last
intent.
page.
Representative Austin.
Yeah, can infill always happen in any space? Infill building,
Can it always happen?
if this space in a village or.
I don't know the answer to that. Depends on the proposed use, I suppose. Are you talking about just housing?
Mhm.
I mean, I don't, that's a very broad question. I
Mm.
wouldn't say. That's probably why we have development reviews, because every situation is different.
On page 19, subdivision B is amending the planned growth area category. So it's striking reference to new town centers, downtowns, and village centers and leaving them as growth centers and neighborhood development areas previously designated. And then also striking the reference to the smart growth principles because that cross-reference has been moved up. And I believe that what this change is doing, I think originally planned growth areas were supposed to be an overlay on top of the downtown and village centers, and now it will be more of a ring or a portion directly adjacent as opposed to on top of. And so by striking new town center, downtown, or village center, those were the core areas, whereas neighborhood development areas were adjacent and growth centers were overlays also. So
Also, is it trying, does this get to, those are part of the community investment programs titles that they would remain, they just aren't future land use areas.
planned growth areas are part of the new program, and the designated areas are not going to be in the new program anyway. I don't think I answered your question. I think you should probably hear from the RPCs on this, maybe. I think it's adjusting what they initially thought was gonna be an overlay, and now it's more of an adjacent category.
Do you have a question, Representative?
Yes,
Yeah.
in sitting in on some of the planning commission meetings where RPCs met, hamlets came up. Where do hamlets fit in here? Or do they fit in?
I think there is, I think hamlets are in one of the categories. Hamlets are a category in the land use categories. It's subdivision G, which is not here. Those are small historic clusters of homes and may include school, place of worship, store, or other public buildings, not planned for significant growth. No public water supply or wastewater systems, mostly focused along one or two roads, and may be depicted as points on a future land use map.
Purpose of a hamlet is, what do you get if you're a hamlet?
You do
And a
not.
lovely feeling. I would like to live in a hamlet.
I don't think hamlets are currently eligible for any of the incentives under Act 250 or the community investment program.
So you're just acknowledging that it's a hamlet, or?
Well, so it is one of the 11 categories that the land use map can have. And so it is a different type of area than a village center, or it's not a transition area. I guess it's addressing that there are some areas that don't have sewer or water and are along a main road and may have,
Would still be kind of village-esque.
I got 10 of those towns.
Hamlets. And do they want us to force them to be village centers?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't either.
That's one of the reasons why I asked. Hamlet's growth centers, what are the possibilities for a growth center to become a town center? Is there written anything into the statute? And I think of that because of, like I brought up yesterday, we have municipalities that are smack dab in the middle of an area where we find out, okay, it's flood prone. Not making something completely going away without the opportunity for it to eventually, over time, if that municipality chooses to find a place near, but not right on top of a flood prone area. That's why I asked the question.
You were asking growth center versus what was the?
Well, the hamlet, I'm just thinking of my rural districts where we have, hamlets and places that, I don't know if they,
But you used a different word. You said a growth center becoming,
a village center.
to me, that's inverted, like a village center would become a growth center. But, so you're saying.
I guess I gotta learn the terminology better.
Well, I think you're saying in the instance, I
It's a
think
lot.
are you saying, let's see if I understand, if you identified a growth center and then hopefully this wouldn't be happening right now, realize that it was too flood prone, you needed to move it. Yeah, I think the intent would be, yes, you could upgrade a village center or a hamlet if you had the infrastructure capacity there. Right? Like,
Well, that's the question. If you don't have it, then you decide over time, it's gonna evolve and it's gonna migrate, hopefully slowly and not drive people out. What infrastructure is gonna be there?
well, infrastructure shows up when communities invest in it. Right? Like that's what brings water and sewer service to a town. They have to want it, they have to bond for it, and they have to plan for it. That's how it gets there. Okay.
And so planned growth areas are one of the areas that are eligible under the community investment program for additional incentives. And so there are some additional criteria that are not shown on page 19 because of the ellipses, but there are amendments proposed from the Senate on a couple of the criteria of what a planned growth area includes. And so at the bottom towards the bottom of page 19, line 15, so the planned growth area, the area is generally compact and has multimodal connection to the municipalities or the adjacent municipalities, downtown or village center. And so it's striking walking distance and replacing it with compact and multimodal connections. And it's also striking reference that it's adjacent to the new town center or growth center, but that they're adjacent to downtown or village center.
Katie Gallagher, can I put you on the spot a little bit on this multimodal versus walkable change and what your interpretation of it might be?
Sure. Katie Gallagher with the Vermont Natural Resources Council. So as we testified last week or whenever that was, the intention of including walking distance is that it's generally used in planning lingo as a way to have a kind of discrete measurement of distance, whether it's usually quarter mile or half a mile. I believe that there were two kind of main conversations that were happening that led to this change in language. One was a concern that walking distance might be ableist and not accommodate people who are using a wheelchair or other mobility device. And the other, I think it's a recognition that perhaps, particularly in more rural areas, you might not safely be able to walk to the downtown, even though it might be only a quarter mile out. And so how do we accommodate for that? So this language was a little bit of a kind of last minute, like throwing spaghetti at the wall. I think I would say from my perspective, we are supportive of trying to ensure that we are still both getting at the goals of this area being walkable or pedestrian oriented, as in it is a compact, discrete place. And also the second goal of trying to accommodate places that might not, we'll never have a sidewalk, but will always be the, kind of growth area of a rural area. So all that being said, compact and multimodal connection might be able to get there. We don't really have a great definition and statute to my knowledge of multimodal. I was concerned that could mean, you can take a car or you can take a bus. And that's not really achieving our intent. So I still feel comfortable with walking distance. And to say from like a planning perspective, that does include people who are using a wheelchair or other, not using their legs. So I think it's just kind of a question also of interpretation. Again, when we are looking at all of the people that are ideally involved in trying to determine how these land use categories, where these land use categories are, it should be a definition that is, clearly understandable to all of us. And I'm not sure if we're getting that with compact and multimodal connection. That's what I would say.
Multimodal, yes, seems too broad. Seems like you could hop in your car and drive 10 miles and 5 miles, you're in town
In a few minutes.
in a few minutes. Representative Chapin.
Yeah, I guess I'll again just say, like, I'd love to not take on every one of these potential changes and take lots of testimony on them to figure them out. If there's not a big problem that's going on here, I'd really love to move on and not make this change and focus on some other things that we're gonna really have to get to.
Yeah.
And I appreciate trying to be less ableist, but in this case, we need to stick with terms that are already like used in the planning field, and this isn't well vetted and it has some issues. It's not even, it doesn't even use the word transportation. I'd love to move on and just, and not keep this.
Okay. Seeing nods.
So the next change is at the bottom of page 19, still on the requirements for a planned growth area. So it adds language that the area provides opportunity for development, infill development, and redevelopment that is needed to meet the regional and municipal housing targets onto page 20, that meet the present and future needs of a diversity of social and income groups in the community.
As said before, the area provides for housing targets that meets other needs. I see any issue with it. Any more words? More words. It's the same thing.
Yeah, it's not a huge distinction from the prior language.
No.
All right, page 20. So still in planned growth area requirements, it's striking the quotations around complete streets. That is a program, but you don't need to have quotes around it. And then also striking reference to that the area is the area is served by planned or existing transportation infrastructure that conforms to complete streets and establishes pedestrian access directly to downtown or village center, and is striking again Newtown Center. So this one is pretty similar actually to the language on the prior page about pedestrian access directly to the downtown or village center.
They're striking Newtown Center because they don't think it should have pedestrian access.
Yes, well, Newtown centers were also struck on the prior page from the rest of it, so I think
They still exist.
temporarily, yes, but they are going away.
You know what this is in response to, that they're going away.
Okay. All right, page 20, subsection C is amending the village area category. It is also changing the walking distance to compact and multimodal. But it is also changing another and to an or. So traditional settlement area or proposed new settlement area typically composed of cohesive mix of residential, civic, religious, commercial, or mixed-use buildings arranged along a main street and intersecting streets that are compact and multimodal connections for residents who live within and surrounding the downtown center or village center. It's then striking these areas include existing village center designations or similar areas, but this area is larger than the village center designation. And so the village center designation is going away into the new downtown or village center in the community investment program.
So, do we want to be consistent here and keep within walking distance? Yeah.
And then there are a few requirements for village areas, and so a couple of them are being changed. At the bottom of page 20, the municipality has either public water or wastewater. And if no public water or wastewater is available, the area must have soils that are adequate for water and wastewater disposal. I think this was, the request was to make it match the defined term in Title 24.
I think it also was because some of the water supplies are not, they're public, but they're not municipal.
Mhm.
It's just broadening that to recognize, and the Woodstock example came up.
Oh, yes. So I will say that currently in S328, and then as proposed for possible inclusion here, there is a defined term in Title 24. Oh, is it? In Title 24, it's defined as area served by municipal water and sewer. And it may be a good idea to make sure if we're talking about the same systems, we match them. I think that has come up.
We trust you'll help us keep track of that.
Okay, yes, that's a good note for me. And then at the top of page 21, still on village areas, it's adding similar language that was added to the prior one, which is that infill development or new development areas where village can grow, support the development of housing to meet the regional and municipal housing targets and be flood resilient. Next, on page 21, the rural conservation area category is being amended, and it's striking reference to mapping these areas are intended to help meet the requirements of 10 VSA Chapter 89, 30 by 30, 50 by 50. And then also striking, which makes sense, but any portion of the area that is a Tier 3 area will also be identified in these areas. So those are being struck as well.
What was the reason for that?
I think at least part of it was a timing concern because they're doing the updates to the regional plans right now and the Tier 3 areas were not available. And so if they got mapped and were adopted, then the regional plans would have to then again go back and amend the plan to reflect those.
I'm fine with this change.
And then at the bottom of page 21, subsection D. So this is about making sure this is addressed as part of the community investment program. So with the exception of pre-existing non-conforming designations approved prior to the establishment of the state community investment program, which is the successor program to the state designated area program. So it's adding reference to that. The areas are eligible for designation benefits under that program upon the board's approval of a future land use map for designation as a downtown center or village center. So this is mostly just adding language to be just clear.
So we're in, is this under rural conservation still?
No, this is out of the categories entirely, and it's just part of the full section of what things are needed to be included in the regional plan
Oh, yeah.
itself. And so directing that pre-existing non-conforming issues can stay, but in the future, they should not include development that is disconnected from a downtown or village center and that lacks existing or planned pedestrian connections. So direction to the RPC that they, while there have been some existing designated areas that perhaps contain sprawl, there shouldn't be future ones that include sprawl.
Logan.
Thanks. I, just going back to conservation area, it does seem to me like we would, if, I don't know where we're headed with our conversation around like a replacement for the idea of tier 3, but it does seem like we would want there to be an amendment of a regional plan if there's some kind of protected status.
Yeah, so let's look at the list of, so forest fox habitat, clear conservation purposes. I mean, these are areas of significant natural resources. I hear you, especially if we're gonna go towards sort of like incentive-based or voluntary-based. Part of the thing is we want people to become aware of the natural resources that are on their properties. That's kind of what you're saying.
Yeah.
And this is maybe the go-to place for a lot of people, would be their regional plan map.
Yeah. But it is under the category of rural conservation, so it does seem like it's not a perfect match necessarily.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it should just apply to one land use category, and it's a conversation we need to have a committee of like, "Ooh, what are we doing now?" So I guess, I'd love to like
Put that in.
put that in the hopper for like.
Yeah.
And it may be the result of the work that we get started on this
Right.
session. It might not be ready to go into a section like that.
Yeah, don't see how it would fit in this.
Yes. But we need to at least reference that needs
Personally,
to happen.
Yeah, and personally, I'd love to see again, like a little more ground up, like at the town level into the regional. So, but yes, ultimately, we'd love to have good mapping.
And that those significant resources are not limited to one kind of district.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, which is what
People know where the wetlands are, even if they're in a growth area. Yep.
Okay, on page 22, the next section is section 13. This is adding the smart growth principles to 24 VSA 4303, which is the definition section for the planning, the regional and municipal planning section.
Relocating them.
Yes.
And the words are the same as they were.
Yes.
Okay.
At the bottom of page 23 is the next change. It's section 14, which is a repeal. And I mentioned this the last time we were doing the walkthrough. It's repealing 24 VSA 4476, which is the formal review of regional planning commission decisions. So I do think it would be a good idea to look at this language that's in the statute, because part of the statute does reference a body that was eliminated in 2010. Although I have heard that there has been recent use of this statute, and I'm not, so the RPC's proposed repealing this because they haven't been using it, but it may be a good idea to see if there's anything in there that should be.
Moved and or put into our next steps.
Yeah.
And so we'd like to schedule that with you.
Okay. Right. Page 24. Section 15 is a session law provision. It is extending any regional or municipal plan due to expire in 2026 shall have its expiration date extended until December 31st, 2026.
Enough time.
Yes, and so the regional planning commissions asked for this because some of them will expire before the LURB grants approval.
Yeah.
And so they just raised that the ones that are expiring this year would have potentially a gap. They were not as concerned about next year, but so that was their suggestion, was just until the 31st of this year. So, but perhaps.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, right. Representative Chapin.
Yeah, and that, so and that's partly because the LURB believes they're gonna stay on schedule with the approval of these regional plans,
Both
which
of
is
them do, yeah.
great. But what we also heard is that if the regional plans are expired and we're not able to come back in December and make this change again, tax credit things you're not eligible. Projects are not eligible. So personally, I think the risk is high enough if LURB doesn't quite meet their deadline. Like I think we should just extend this farther to like at least July 1 of 2027 so that we could make a change next session if necessary.
Just go on.
Or just, I mean, I'd be happy with December 2027. I
agree.
Yeah.
Do you want it to say that any plan that expires in 2026 and 2027 is then extended to December 31st, 2027, or just those 2026 ones?
I just asked the LURB about that, but seems logical, but maybe we should just.
I think this is more the regional planning commissions and the community investment board, right?
Yeah.
They're the tax people.
Right, they would know when their plans expire.
Page 24, section 16, these start some of the amendments to the community investment program. And so first, in section 5801, the definition section, first, the definition of planned growth area is being simplified so that it is an area on the regional plan future land use maps, meeting the requirements of subdivision 4348A, and that may be designated as a neighborhood. So that is the reference to what we were talking about a few pages ago, the land use category planned growth area is then used in an upcoming section as an area that could be designated as a neighborhood area.
Starting to hit my afternoon maximum capacity. Perhaps others are too.
We're almost there.
We are almost there, but I also, so what is the ramification of and that may be designated as a neighborhood here?
I think that this is just streamlining the definition. I don't think it's changing anything substantively.
Oh, I see, right, because above it's.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you actually may not even need a definition here because the statute about it's 5804, I believe, goes through the process of making sure that a planned growth area meets the requirements to be a neighborhood area. So you maybe don't even need to have this definition. but it would just be streamlining it to cross-reference the land use category definition. Subdivision 10 is the definition of sprawl repair, and it's just adding the cross-reference to the smart growth principles. Then there's some more sort of cleanup in the definition of centers, and so it's clean, and this went back and forth a few times during the committee process on this new program. So it's changing it to be designated downtown center or village center, or just designated center. Means a downtown or village center approved as part of the LURB review of regional plan future land use maps. And so it's then striking some of the requirements that are then discussed in the statute itself on downtown and village centers. And so this is the chapter that's the successor program to the designated areas. And this is about translating the areas on the regional plan maps into areas that become designations that have associated incentives. And then similar amendments are made in subdivision 13 on page 25 for designated neighborhood, or neighborhood means a village area or planned growth area approved by the LURB review of the regional plan future land use map that is contiguous to a center. And so I guess I'll just say, I think, so these are amendments, these and the next ones are amendments to chapter 139, the new community investment program. And I think there have been in the statute inconsistent terms because that the development of the language on this program was sort of iterative. And so I think there are things that need to be cleaned up to just be matching. And so that is some of this. Because that program is going to start rolling out when the LURB starts approving the regional plans. So the Department of Housing and Community Development is the one who they work on incentives associated with this program. And so I think they're starting to see that the language is a little inconsistent in places and needs to be lined up to be more clear. And then similar changes then being made in subdivision 15 on village areas. It's again having the cross-reference to 4348 and saying that it may be designated as a neighborhood. And so this new community investment program is creating the downtown center or village center category, and then the neighborhood area, as well as planned growth areas. All right, bottom of page 25, section 17 is amending 24 VSA 5803, which is the designation of downtown and village centers. So the RPC may apply to the LURB for approval and designation of all downtown and village centers by submitting the future land use map plan. It's striking reference that they need to identify the areas on that map as eligible for designation. I think that's because that is sort of already the process that these areas are based on what the land use category is. And so the department and the state board shall provide comments to the LURB and the Regional Planning Commission on areas eligible for designation as provided in 4348. And then it is striking the language in subsection C because it is nearly identical to the language in subdivision D back on page 1. And so when this was drafted, I included the language in subdivision D and subdivision C because it is sort of relevant to both parts of the process, but these are processes that overlap. The RPC goes through and identifies what areas meet the category definitions. And then as part of the state community investment program, they're supposed to then also look at the areas eligible for designation. And in both places, it says it should not include areas that are development that are disconnected from the center and lack pedestrian connections. So again, talking about not including sprawl areas as part of these centers. And so I put it in both statutes to make sure it was clear. It has been suggested that it's redundant, so we're striking it here. You could also strike it in the other section, whichever would be easier to read, but it applies to both steps of the system. So making sure whichever time you decide in which section would be making sure that sprawl areas are not included. And then
Yeah, so it's included as in the future land use. I mean, it's like the categories of future land use, but then this is really for eligibility in the community investment program. So
Yes.
We want it both. Is that right? Do I have that right?
Yes.
Okay, so.
Yeah, yes.
So there was a reason to have it in both places.
I thought there might be, but as the program is starting to get underway, it has been suggested that it is redundant because the RPCs will be looking at both sections during their process anyways. So I don't necessarily think you need to make this change, but this was a change that was proposed by the RPCs as being redundant.
Okay. Others have any opinion on this? Representative Chapin?
I guess I'm hearing from our legislative council that belts and suspenders can be fine, that there's really not substantive problem with having this here. There might not be a substantive problem with not having it here. And personally, I guess we're making so many changes. Again, I would say like maybe leave the belts and suspenders in this case. Nobody's saying it would be a problem.
Yeah, and so I'm not sure if you have heard from the department yet on this because they're starting to do this, and so I'm not sure if they have I don't know if they have a position on which is preferable or if it's redundant, but they will also be working on this process in this statute. And then the last section 18 is amending 32 VSA 5930BB, which is part of the Downtown and Village Center Tax Credit Program. And so as I talked about the last time, it's adding clarification that there is an application process for private projects in downtowns and village centers to apply for the different types of tax credits under this program. However, one of the primary requirements of this program is that the buildings be at least 30 years old. And by updating the land use categories and the designated areas, that has also included in this process new town centers and younger areas that are less than 30 years old and would not technically qualify for the program, even though they are now technically located in downtowns and village centers. And so it's saying that the guidelines shall clearly indicate that only applications located in step 2 or 3 designated centers or step 1, where a portion of the designated center is listed or eligible for listing on the National Register of Historic Places, shall be considered. So we have these areas that under the tax credit statute are eligible for tax credits, but in the land use map, we've now allowed younger areas to be in those areas, but the requirements of the tax credits have not changed. So it still needs to be buildings older than 30 years old to qualify for these tax credits.
30 years old seems young.
I believe it's 30. I can double check.
50.
Is it?
It's 50 for.
Is it?
but
Okay, it might be fixed.
I think maybe it's 30 if you're a car. I think if you're a building, it might need to be 50. We can clarify that.
And then I guess I'll just say on page 27, the effective date currently is effective on passage. And I will just point out that repealing statutes that haven't taken effect yet, as you are discussing doing with tier 3 and the road jurisdiction, it's a little tricky to draft. And so this may change.
or judgment.
Getting back up to make sure, repealing a thing that hasn't happened yet is a little awkward.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
Our world. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Ellen. So members, we have, we're getting, I think, more clarity on what's here for us. And I know some folks are working on ideas for new things we might want to add to the bill. And so I guess I'm gonna put out there, do we want to try to put a wrap on this first? And then move to those things? That's kind of my inclination, but then it might be also related to our draft or yeah, okay, and then what gives us time to percolate a little bit more on other things. Okay, so we'll try to do that. I'd also like to get to closure in 223 pretty soon. So, with that, I think we can wrap it up for the day and adjourn.